Because that's what really caught everyone's eye, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you live in Southern California. You probably saw the pictures, maybe even saw it yourself. That flash, the noise, and then this huge safety flare just turned the night sky bright orange over West LA. Really dramatic stuff near places like Manhattan Beach.
Absolutely. And, while everyone was focused on the drama, the safety aspect, and thankfully Chevron did confirm no injuries, everyone accounted for the logistical side of it. That's where the really deep impact lies. We're basically looking at an immediate, massive stress test on a vital piece of California's energy system.
Exactly. So that's our mission today, to really unpack what happened with this fire at Chevron's El Segundo refinery. And this isn't just, any old facility. It's massive. It processes 285,000 barrels of oil a day. It's the second biggest refinery in the whole state, and Chevron's second biggest in the U.S. When something like this hiccups, you feel it fast.
Yeah, and to really get why those consequences hit so quickly, you first need to grasp this fundamental vulnerability of California's market. It essentially operates like an energy island. Because the state has, really strict environmental rules, specifically these unique complex fuel blend requirements. People call it the boutique blend. We can't just, pull extra gasoline or jet fuel from pipelines linking us to Texas or Arizona when there's a sudden shortfall. The fuel just isn't compatible.
Right. So if a major local supplier like El Segundo goes down, or even partially down, the options become really limited very quickly. It's either existing stockpiles or these really long-distance imports. Which brings us right back to the fire itself. Let's dig into the specifics of the damage, because this detail turns out to be crucial. The fire started Thursday evening, but the location, very specific.
Yeah, it struck right at the heart of their high-value production, specifically the jet fuel unit. Sources ID'd this piece of equipment as the Isomax 7. This is a specialized converter. It takes a heavier type of fuel oil and uses intense hydroprocessing, hydrogen, and pressure to turn it into that highly refined jet fuel needed for aircraft. When that unit went offline because of the fire, the operational impact just cascaded almost instantly.
And the numbers behind that impact, they're pretty staggering, especially when you look at aviation. This one refinery, this single facility, supplies 40% of all the jet fuel used in Southern California.
Yeah.
That kind of dependency on one place, that's what really defines the problem here, doesn't it?
It's a huge concentration of supply, absolutely. And the fire in the Isomax 7 didn't just stop jet fuel production there. It actually forced the shutdown of other connected units downstream. Even if those other units weren't directly touched by the fire itself, they had to shut down. We saw a significant chunk of refining capacity go offline.
Can you give us a sense of what that chain reaction looked like? I know the sources mentioned data from Wood Mackenzie showing this cascade effect.
Exactly. So we saw shutdowns like the 60,000 barrel per day catalytic reformer, the 45,000 barrel per day catalytic reformer, the 45,000 barrel per day hydrocracker, and the big 73,000 barrel per day fluid catalytic cracker, the FCC unit. Now, for you listening, these units are kind of the chemical workhorses of the refinery. The hydrocracker, for example, it uses intense pressure and hydrogen to break down heavier, sort of lower value stuff into lighter, more valuable products like gasoline components and jet fuel blend stock. Losing that capability isn't just a quick pause. It means the whole system loses the ability to make those specific high-quality fuels that planes need or that go into specialized gasoline blends.
Okay, but there's a really key detail here, too, which kind of explains the weird market reaction we'll get to in a minute. The refinery's main crude distillation units, the ones that do the initial processing of raw crude oil, those were apparently still online. So the whole plant wasn't totally out of action, but its ability to make the finished specialized fuels was badly hit.
Right. And that loops back to the public reaction, which was all about those safety measures, especially that huge flare. That massive orange glow wasn't just like an accident. That flare system is designed to do exactly that when pressure builds up. If the refinery suddenly can't process all the hydrocarbons flowing through because a key unit like the Isomax 7 is down, they have to safely burn off the excess gas to relieve that pressure. Looks scary, sure, but it's a necessary safety valve.
And given how close El Segundo is to LAX, Los Angeles International Airport, obviously there was immediate concern about flight operations. Mayor Karen Bass put out a statement pretty quickly saying there was no known impact to LAX at this time, which sounds reassuring, but feels a bit like crisis management.
Oh, absolutely it is. Planes didn't immediately stop taking off, true. But that statement only really tells you that LAX had enough fuel in its short-term storage tanks right then. But think about it. If 40% of your main supply line is suddenly choked off, the big question is, How long can LAX, one of the busiest airports on the planet, run on just its existing inventory? Especially when the timeline for fixing that ISOMAX unit wasn't clear immediately. That buffer, that reserve capacity, it starts evaporating really fast, which takes us right into the market reaction.
Okay, yeah, let's pivot to the market consequences because this is where it gets really interesting and frankly kind of counterintuitive.
Oh, yeah.
If 40% of the jet fuel supply is potentially gone, you'd expect a massive price shock, right? But the fascinating part is how differently the market reacted for jet fuel compared to regular gasoline that you put in your car.
Yeah, the aviation sector felt it immediately and hard. Patrick DeHaan, an analyst over at GasBuddy, confirmed that jet fuel prices shot up by a massive 33 cents a gallon. That was on the Friday afternoon, right after the Thursday night fire. That's a huge overnight jump. Airlines flying into or out of Southern California, they absorb that cost instantly.
Wow. Okay, 33 cents. Now, compare that to the average driver pulling up to the pump. Most people in SoCal are buying regular gasoline. For them, the price impact was expected to be much smaller, only about 5 to 15 cents a gallon rise. That gap, 33 cents for planes versus maybe 15 cents max for cars, that's enormous. Why such a difference?
And that, right there, is the core vulnerability of this whole incident just laid bare. The reason gasoline wasn't hit nearly as hard is, well, it's technical, but it goes back to the specific damage. Remember, the fire was really centered on the ISOMAX 7, that specialized jet fuel production unit. The analysis confirmed that the refinery's main gasoline-producing units were apparently not directly impacted by the fire itself.
Huh. So the fire was specific enough, localized enough within the refinery that it crippled the specialized aviation fuel line, but didn't take out the ability to produce the more sort of general purpose motor fuel, at least not to the same degree. It really highlights how sensitive these specialized fuel chains are.
It absolutely does.
Mm.
But, we should keep that 5 to 15 cent gasoline bump in perspective, too. California gas prices were already painfully high. They were averaging close to $4.70 a gallon around then, while the national average was way down, under $3.22. So, yeah, the shock was less severe than for jet fuel, but the starting point for drivers was already pretty high.
Okay, so let's follow the jet fuel problem. We've lost potentially 40% of the local supply. We know we can't just easily pipeline it in from other U.S. regions because of those unique California fuel specs. So what happens? Where does the replacement fuel come from?
This is where the global supply chain kicks in, and it directly connects Los Angeles to the other side of the Pacific. California is basically forced to scramble for these long-distance imports. It means we'll likely have to pull in significantly more jet fuel cargoes from refiners in Northeast Asia. Think major suppliers in places like South Korea, Taiwan, and Japan.
Wow. That sounds like it takes time, and I assume it's pretty expensive too. What does that actually look like, practically speaking, bringing in extra fuel from that far away?
Well, it's intense.
Yeah.
I mean, the Long Beach area already imports a fair bit of jet fuel, something like 45,000 to 50,000 barrels per day normally. But to cover the shortfall from a huge refinery like El Segundo operating way below capacity, market sources were saying they need to secure and bring in at least one more cargo over the next few weeks.
And just so we understand, when analysts talk about one more cargo, we're talking about chartering a huge tanker ship, right? Holding maybe hundreds of thousands of barrels, then sailing it all the way across the Pacific, coordinating tricky port schedules in a Long Beach, and paying all the extra shipping costs. That immediate need to source globally like that, it's the definition of supply chain strain.
Exactly. And if we zoom out a bit, connect this incident to the bigger picture, what it really does is throw a spotlight on a vulnerability that wasn't exactly new. California's market was already tightening up quite dramatically. That tightening was happening because of major refinery closures that were planned long before this fire ever happened.
Ah, right. That context is critical. The planned closures are like this dark cloud hanging over the whole situation. The sources mention two big ones that make this current problem feel even worse.
That's right. Phillips 66 is already in the process of shutting down its big 139,000 barrel per day refinery near Los Angeles. That's a permanent closure, converting to something else. And then looking a bit further out, Valero's refinery up in Benicia in Northern California, that's also scheduled to close its traditional operations in April 2026.
And the scale of that permanent loss of capacity is just huge. Even if this Chevron fire ends up being a relatively short-term issue, those two closures you mentioned, together they produce something like 20% of the entire state's gasoline supply. So while this current crisis is mainly hitting jet fuel hard, the future vulnerability looks like it could be much broader.
Yeah, there was an analyst from StoneX who really put it well. They said this Chevron fire will definitely prop up fuel prices across the board in the short term, but it also creates this massive scramble ahead of the closure that was already expected from Phillips 66 later this year. The market was already kind of running on thin margins. This fire just yanked the rug out from under it, especially for jet fuel.
And as you expect, state and federal safety agencies are now digging into what exactly caused this fire, especially in a complex, high-pressure unit like the ISOMAX 7. That kind of scrutiny is necessary, particularly since this refinery has had incidents before, like another smaller fire that was put out quickly back in December 2022. Every incident like this raises questions about maintenance, safety protocols, especially with aging infrastructure.
Definitely.
So, wrapping this up, what does this all really mean for you, the listener? This deep dive exposes this kind of triple threat vulnerability that's pretty unique to California. First, you've got this isolated market because of the special fuel blends. Second, you have these huge essential refineries where damage to just one specialized part, like the ISOMAX 7, can instantly cause massive price spikes for that specific fuel. And third, all of this is happening in a market that's already shrinking structurally because of these big planned refinery closures down the road.
Yeah, and that difference in impact, the huge 33-cent jump for jet fuel versus the much smaller bump for gasoline, that's really the perfect illustration of how specialization creates fragility in a supply chain. If your business or your travel relies on these very specific, highly refined products like jet fuel, your supply chain is just inherently more brittle, more easily disrupted than one that relies on more generalized stuff like regular gasoline.
So the final, maybe provocative thought we want to leave you with builds right on that idea of a specialization and isolation. How much backup, how much physical redundancy is actually practical or even affordable for critical infrastructure like this, especially when a single localized fire in one processing unit forces these immediate multi-million-dollar global trade decisions. I mean, think about it. Scrambling to get emergency fuel shipped all the way from South Korea just to keep planes flying out of LAX, that immediate global reach required. It really shows you just how thin the margin for error can be in our modern logistics systems.